Alright guys, this was something that had kind of come to me the other day. A friend of mine had sent me a Matt Chandler video, and it really talked about the decline of Christianity in the U.S. And I would have to agree. I like Matt Chandler. I think he speaks the truth in a lot of ways. However, I'm not a real big advocate of people presenting problems without providing a solution. And this was just a little snippet of a sermon. I'm sure Matt Chandler probably did provide a solution in his full sermon. But so I began to kind of wrestle with this, and I've seen this in my own Christian life as well. You guys know that I like John Bunyan's book, Pilgrim's Progress, which chronicles the life. It's a fictional story that chronicles the life of this guy named Christian, who leaves the city of destruction, symbolic of the world, and starts down this path, symbolic of the Christian life, and is on his way to the celestial city, symbolic of heaven. Along this path, there's all these detours. There's the swamp of despond, where he ends up getting off of that narrow path, and he ends up in this place of despondency about his sin. There's the hill of legalism, where he's climbing up this hill, and he gets off on legalism. He meets different people along the way where he gets off into this kind of easy believism and stuff. But every time he kind of gets into he gets off track, so to speak, there's a guy named Evangelist who appears to him and tells him to keep pointed at that light. He sees the light up on the hill. Keep yourself oriented on that light. And it really began to kind of speak to me, because no matter where we are in our Christian life, if we've gotten off track and we get into legalism, if we've gotten off track and we get into easy believism or intellectualism or Doubting Castle was one of the other places Christian ran into. Wherever we are, if we just reorient ourselves back towards the gospel, we don't need to reorient ourselves back to where we were. If we find ourselves too far to the right, we don't want to reorient ourselves back to the left, because we end up inevitably overshooting. We want to just reorient ourselves back to the gospel, because Jesus is the way, and the gospel points to Jesus. So we start off here with Abraham, and Abraham believed, and it was counted to him for righteousness. Now, I've heard it said this way before, the difference between belief and faith. I can believe that a chair holds me up, but it takes faith for me to actually sit down in it. And the tendency is that we have a tendency to say a little prayer, and then we believe, quote unquote believe, but there's no faith there. It doesn't produce anything. And we end up in this area where we start to get off track, and we get off into this path of easy believism. This idea that, well, okay, I've said my prayer. And the idea is that our faith then becomes in the prayer and not in the one whom the prayer was directed to. And there's a vast difference here, because one produces an external sort of change. It produces an external sense of righteousness, but no inward change. And the same thing can be said when we start to drift off into legalism. We get this idea where, okay, well, we got to get back, we see the easy believism that's going on in the world, or maybe we even find ourselves in this area of easy believism, and we know that's not right. We know Jesus said the way was narrow. We know that he preached righteousness. So we say, no, this isn't right, and then we end up over here going back to the law for righteousness, and that's missing the point, because at any point here, if we pointed ourselves back to the gospel, if we got off to the right and we pointed ourselves back to the gospel, that would draw us back to that narrow path. So the tendency is not the pendulum swing too far to the left, let's go ahead and swing let's go ahead and cut against that and swing back to the right, because it's still all about us. It's about faith in our prayer. It's about the Mosaic law. It's about our righteousness. It all comes down to us, and we miss the point entirely that it's not about us. It's about the gospel. It's about what Jesus did. Jesus is that narrow gate in that wall that separates us separates us from the Father. Jesus is where that narrow path leads, and that gospel is that light that points us to Him. So the tendency is that, we get off track. We're ending up over here in this legalistic view in the Mosaic law, and we don't find fulfillment and righteousness in that. So we're like, well, we got to press in more. We got to get more legalistic. So we end up in this Judaic law where now all of a sudden we're observing, certain Old Testament type rituals. These things are not in and of themselves wrong. They weren't wrong back then. They're not wrong now. But all of these things were to point us to Christ. All of these things, in Colossians it says that these things are a foreshadowing of things to come. All of these things are pointing us back to the gospel. And if we get off track, all of a sudden, once again, we're caught up in our righteousness. All of these things. So we get off into the Judaic law. Then, the next thing is we don't find fulfillment in that. We end up in this Pharisaical type law where now we're kind of blending this Old Testament understanding with this New Testament understanding, and we end up just in this place of just deep conviction and despond. And that was that pit of despond that that Christian in the book Pilgrim's Progress found himself in, where all of the Mosaic law, the Judaic law, had a lot to do with our outward condition and stuff, and then we get up into the New Testament understanding of it, and we find out that Jesus actually raised the bar. He actually raised the bar and said, okay, well, it's not just adultery when you commit adultery. It's adultery whenever you look on a woman with lust. And we end up just in this place of just where we're just sinking in our sin, and we lose track of what it is that we should be focused on, which is, no matter where we are in this process, we reorient ourselves back towards the gospel. So the tendency is, and I've noticed this with myself, the tendency is I see some unrighteousness, I see intellectualism, I see doubt, I see these things going on in my mind, and my tendency is I want to push back against it. The pendulum has swung too far to the left, and I realize I've gotten off track, so I want to push back against it, and I get back into the law and stuff, and that's not it. That's not the direction that we should be going. No matter where we are, if we just point ourselves back to the gospel, back to Christ, that leads us back to the path. So that was something I wanted to share with you guys. Hope I didn't ramble too much, but this was something that had just kind of resonated with me and had kind of made sense with me. So, all right, God bless.